Welcome to the Scent of Beauty. My name is Susan, and this video is titled, It Could Be Worse, Superlative to What? Part 7, and this is the conclusion. This has been an eye-opener for me. Thanks to NASA, thanks to the Living Star program, thanks to the probes that got really up close and personal to the sun. They have been instrumental to this series of videos. The extreme nature of a visceral being, the sun, our star. We got to explore the core of the sun, the radiative zone, and now we're in the convection zone. We took a look at the bottom of the convection zone, and now this is the surface, and how it relates to visceral feelings, unconscious movement, nonetheless very alive, very lively movements, actions coming from repetitiveness and learning the feelings within our body that expresses, or we actually identify as specific emotions. We categorize it like the radiative zone is different than the convection zone, and we can identify what zone we are in based on learning from the sun. An unknown author said, and I quote, "Ignorance is neither a sin nor a crime, but it is an obstacle to seeing our situation realistically." And the father of American psychology, William James, 19th century philosopher, psychologist, he said, habit is a second nature, or rather, it is 10-time nature. And I could comprehend that statement based on this series. Part 6 emphasizes this truth in regards to a child terrified of a stuffed animal, inanimate object, and going through the real raw emotions of terror. 10 times the body's nature, doing it over and over again, visceral feelings that we couldn't reason with an infant and state it could be worse. It could be a real animal that poses a threat, but the child wouldn't understand. They're just feeling what they feel and express it. Visceral feelings. William James also quote, "Tension is a habit, relaxing is a habit. Bad habits can be broken, good habits formed." And the granulation at the surface of the sun teaches us that both can be operating at the same time. We know this through vibrations and sound waves. The energetic charge of feelings. We can examine our energy field lines when it emerges, the loops that it forms. James Lang theory or hypothesis believe the first sense is the body emotion, the changes, the primary indicator. And I want to go on the record of saying it's not just our receptors, but the interceptors. An interceptor is a thing that stops and catches that was going from one location to another. And there is a prevention, an obstruction from continuing to get to that destination. And so often our visceral feelings, while we make the statement it could be worse, our visceral feelings in our body have been prevented, our feelings, because it has intercepted, that has changed the primary indicators. What is our bodies holding onto and running with? And in the last video, I talked about diagnostic and diagnoses, two different things. So diagnostic symptoms and characteristics when the body is in a frantic, hysterical, maniacal frenzy, exhibiting extremely wild behavior, depression, anxiety, shame. We label the emotions instead of having constant visual like NASA. And it's not sad, it's exciting, it's learning, it's having new awarenesses about our bodies, our feelings, our mechanics. We solar maximum our visceral being all the time. Solar maximum it. And we keep ourselves at maximum heightened states. Over and over again, patterns of operating, bent destructively. And we talked about body, the mechanics, magnetic poles that's in our visceral being, getting bent out of shape, our feelings, emulating the extreme visceral being if we watch it closely, like NASA does with the sun. And I said bent destructively, not bent on destruction. And why do I say that? Because it's not malice, just undiagnosed mayhem. We needed an extreme visceral being by its nature, the sun, that cannot change. While it's so beautiful on so many levels, the process is organized to repeat. It's organized and it's repetitive. It has mayhem within the DNA. It's on an 11-year cycle. NASA observed this. And the Earth force field cannot stop it when the violent streak erupts. So what causes our magnetic poles to begin to twist, get us bent out of shape? What causes us to start accumulating dark spots in our being? It shows over time. Areas we stop lighting up in our own lives. It's ironic that conscious proprioceptors is mostly relayed in our dorsal columns. Proprioception is the sixth sense, and that's where is that located? In our bodies. I talked about the messengers within ourselves, in our bodies, and it doesn't stand to reason. It falls apart without care. When proprioceptors decrease, the body doesn't know where it is in relation to space. Have you ever seen those commercials on depression where people are being blended into the external framework? Their body starts to disappear and they just start to blend in. They start to become a part of the framework in feelings and emotions that followed. Sunspot on the sun's surface is an indication that a storm is brewing around it in that specific area. Where in our atmosphere have our light stopped being generated. Quiet Storm was the hour of love songs in the city that I lived in for years. But this is a different quiet storm, convecting 4 million tons of mass into energy per second in an endless loop. That's what happened to the sun when there is a quiet storm brewing. Our bodies continually convert energy, negative energy, and not because we can't see it with the naked eye, it doesn't mean that it's not flaring and that these feelings form dangerous, impulsive, and explosive loops in our lives. And finally, an outburst ejects. James Green is a planetary science, right, that worked with NASA, and he went to the Library of Congress to research Civil War, and he found out, and he found an article that described an aurora, 1859, tucked within documented history. He found news account about a coronal mass ejection, and what that meant to him was he had details to take back to his team at NASA, and they reconstruct what occurred. They found out that these solar storms that I've been referring to was so intense when it flared off and hit the earth. It went through the earth magnetic field and all collapsed. Everything collapsed. It affected the electricity. There were blackouts because of the impact. We're talking about visceral being. It happened in 1989, I believe it was, in Canada. Power station crashed in, I think it was 2012. The sun unleashed plasma clouds known as coronal mass ejection, CMEs. The thing about CMEs, they penetrate through the earth magnetic field. Visceral being, lack of consciousness and conscience causes catastrophes, suffering to others. Behavior modification is not an external textbook, clear and precise method. It starts with the notion of a star, powerful, complex, undeterminate, and the list goes on, etc. The reason I mention the quiet storm that finally erupts and breaks off and directly head towards a target is because if we don't get in touch with our visceral being, our body messages, and make blanket statements, it could be worse. Superlative to what? Being in a bad state or bypassing bad, living in a worse state, not getting to the worst, have its effect internally and externally. Behavior modification stems from changing the superlative. Good, better, best. The ultimate best. See, the spectrum, good, better, the vacillation of a prize winner, conscious coupling. That's the difference between us and a star. We have choice. We could change. We have consciousness and we have a conscience. The visceral being, the nature of the sun, cannot alter its behavioral patterns. Thousands of years, photon travels. Once it breaks through, it takes 8 minutes for the light to get to us. Process. Hopefully, we have gained insight on behavior modification, not to keep trying abrupt means and method to change the result of a behavior. The more in-depth observation on cycles and patterns of behavior and consciously have a conscious coupling with the repetitive region of ourselves. To become familiar with our visceral being doesn't take a long time. It takes a vested period. When we learn the language in the minimal arousal state of our being, we have the ability through conscious coupling with conscience to adjust. That is the nurture we can provide to ourselves and others, benefit also. Less visceral, I should say less visceral flares and storms, learning our bodies, psychological cycles, its psyche, what is at the core. Superlative. Bad, worse, worst, good, better, best. Change. Why? Because preliminary advancement makes all the difference. We could start with a visceral scent of beauty. I'm worth it. Maybe you feel the same way from the beginning to the end. Welcome to the scent of beauty. Thank you.